Have you ever walked into a bar and felt something off? Like the air was too still, the smiles too wide, or the walls were listening. Bars are supposed to be places where we forget, places we go to numb the noise, to escape ourselves. But what if they're the places that remember us best? Tonight, you'll hear 3 true horror stories, accounts whispered across time from bartenders, servers, and travelers who stepped into a bar and never quite came out the same. These aren't stories of ghosts throwing bottles or demons in the shadows. These are psychological hauntings. These are places where your identity unravels, where your reflection isn't yours, where the people drinking beside you know too much. So dim the lights, pour yourself a drink, if you dare, because once you hear what happened inside these bars, you'll never trust the mirror behind the liquor shelf again. Story 1, The Man Who Knew Everyone. I've worked the bar at Haskins Tavern in Merrow, Indiana for going on 8 years now, and there's a rhythm to small town places like this that gets in your bones after a while, like the soft drone of the jukebox playing the same 5 Skynyrd tracks, or the way the door creaks on Human Night. And you start to rely on it, that familiarity, because it makes the loneliness easier to swallow when it all starts to blur together into one long, slow pour of hours. So when he came in that night, tall, pale, hair slicked back like some 1950s businessman, dressed too nice for the place, but not in a flashy way, just clean, neat, like he hadn't sat in dirt the way most of us have, it didn't set off any alarms at first, because you get all types through here. From factory shift ghosts to traveling insurance reps trying to cheat on their diets and their wives. But there was something about his smile when he sat down at the bar that felt anticipatory, like he'd been waiting not just to come in, but for me. And when I asked what he wanted, and he said, "I'll take a glass of the Black Maple Hill. You keep stashed under the counter." I just sort of froze mid-wipe on the tumbler I'd been pretending to clean, because that bottle was something my old boss Frank had gifted me years ago, and I never once served it, never mentioned it. Hell, I forgot it was even there until he said it, and when I looked at him, he just chuckled and said, "Frank always did have a soft spot for you, didn't he?" And I laughed nervously, thinking maybe he was some friend of Frank's I never met before he passed last spring. Except then he started asking about my daughter by name, and that's when things went from odd to wrong, because I don't talk about Amy to customers, not ever, not since her accident. And it wasn't just that he knew her name, it was how he said it, like it weighed something, like he knew what it felt like to say it in the dark when you're alone, and hoping the name can bring her back. And I asked him if we knew each other, and he just said, "Everyone knows someone here, don't they?" Which made no damn sense, so I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. But then he turned to Hank sitting 2 stools down, old-timer who comes in every night since his wife died, orders a PBR, and stares at the TV without ever really watching it. And the stranger says, "That blood in your garage never did wash out, did it, Hank?" And I swear to God, Hank turned white and spilled his beer. And I asked what the hell that was about, but Hank just stood up and left without a word. And I didn't see him for 3 weeks after that night. Now I should have kicked the guy out, told him to stop playing games, but there was something about him that made it hard to move, like when you're stuck in a dream and your body just won't respond no matter how much your brain screams. And more people started coming in, and every single one he spoke to, he knew something. Tammy from the diner who tried to kill herself last Christmas, but nobody was supposed to know. Ryan the mechanic who's been sleeping in the shop office after his wife kicked him out for things he swears he never did. Hell, even me, he whispered. It wasn't your fault. The brakes were already cut when I handed him his second drink, and my knees almost gave out because Amy's crash had been ruled an accident, and no one knew I'd spent nights wondering if someone had tampered with her car, wondering if it had anything to do with that creep she broke up with a week before it happened. But I'd buried it all because that's what you do when the world moves on and you're the only one still screaming in your head. And yet here he was, sipping bourbon and peeling the skin off everyone's secrets like they were oranges. And the worst part was how calm he was about it, how polite, never raising his voice, never insulting anyone, just stating these things like they were trivia, like he was hosting some goddamn pub quiz from hell. And the prize was your dignity, your safety, your sanity. I finally asked him flat out who the hell he was and how he knew these things. And he smiled that same tight smile and said, I just listen, which made me want to hit him, except I realized I wasn't sure if hitting him would do anything. Playing thing. Like maybe he wasn't really here in the way I understood things to be real. So I backed off and said maybe it was time for him to go, but then he leaned in real close and said, you know, the funny thing is you called me Tom. And hearing my name come out of his mouth made my stomach drop because I hadn't introduced myself. But more than that, something about how he said it sounded like a memory I didn't want to find. And I told him to explain what he meant, but he just finished his drink. Left $100 bill on the bar and said, next time you'll remember why, before walking out like nothing had happened. And the second he left, the air felt lighter. The tension snapped like a rubber band. And everyone in the bar looked at each other like they were waking up from some shared trance. But that's not the end. Not even close. Because the next day I found a VHS tape in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written on it in black marker. And I had to dig out my old player from the attic just to watch it. And when I did, I saw myself, me, sitting at the bar on a night that hadn't happened yet, talking to the man again. Only this time I was crying, begging him for something. And he said, you already traded it, Tom. And in the background, I could hear a car crash, metal grinding, and a girl screaming, and I swear on everything that's holy it was Amy's voice. And that night hasn't come yet, but every time I open the bar now, I wait for him to walk in again and finish whatever it is we started. And I can't quit or leave town because something tells me that wouldn't matter, that wherever I go, he'll still show up when it's time. And the worst part is that a small part of me wants him to, because if he knows all the answers, maybe he knows where she is, or if she felt anything. Or if I really could have stopped it, and maybe that's the real horror. Not the things he said or knew, but the way he left me hollowed out, desperate for more of whatever dark knowing he carries like a virus. Like I traded my fear for curiosity, and now I'm paying in sleepless nights and mirrors I don't look at too long, and a silence behind the walls that sometimes breathes when the lights are off. And maybe, just maybe, I've always known he was coming, that I called him into being without realizing it. Because some grief is so loud it echoes into places you're not supposed to reach, and someone heard me. Story 2. The woman in the bathroom mirror. The first time I saw her, I thought I was just tired. Double shifts during summer tourist season at Alta Veda, the kind of swanky rooftop cocktail bar where everything smells like perfume and overcompensation, and where you're always either freezing from the breeze off Lake Michigan or sweating through your uniform under the heat lamps, depending on whether management remembered to adjust them. And that night had been chaos, one of those evenings where the glitterati stagger in for overpriced elderflower spritzes and TikTok photo ops. And you get stuck refilling cucumber water and pretending not to hear men say the same 5 gross things as they ogle you over frosted glass. So when I stepped into the women's bathroom to catch my breath between tables, it barely registered at first that something felt off. Not wrong exactly. See, just slightly shifted. Like when you return to your apartment and something small is out of place, but you can't quite name it. I remember glancing in the mirror, fixing my hair, adjusting my collar, then turning to leave, but she didn't move. My reflection stayed behind for just a second too long, frozen in place with this expression I wasn't making, like she was scared or bracing for something, and I laughed it off, obviously, because what else do you do when your brain glitches except blame fatigue or lighting or stress? And yet that night, after closing, when I went back in to grab my jacket from the supply locker tucked beside the restroom, I checked the mirror again. Don't ask me why, I just had to. And this time she was there again, this version of me, only older, more hollow, face thinner, lips cracked, hair unwashed like she hadn't slept in weeks, and she looked at me with this kind of exhausted desperation, like she'd been waiting. And I stumbled back so hard, I hit the soap dispenser and slipped a little on the tile. But when I looked again, it was just me, same old underpaid. overworked bar waitress with wine stains on her apron and blisters on her feet, and I told myself that maybe the club lighting had bounced weird, or maybe the mirror was just old or warped, except it wasn't, because it was replaced last month when some drunk woman shattered the last one during a meltdown, and I helped unwrap the brand new beveled glass from the crate myself. Still, I said nothing, not to my manager, not to Tanya, not to Kate, because once you admit you're seeing things in the mirror, people stop seeing you the same way, and I needed the job, especially after Mark moved out and the rent was suddenly just mine, so I kept my head down, did my side work, tried to avoid the bathroom unless absolutely necessary, but that's not easy when the only place to cry quietly or text your sister without someone hovering nearby is the one room in the whole bar with a door that locks, and every time I went in there, she was closer, not every time. That's important. That's important. Because she was unpredictable, like whatever governed her presence wasn't logic but mood, and on some nights I'd look, and it would be just me, a little tired, a little sad, and then on others, she'd be there again, watching with that same pleading intensity like she was trapped inside the mirror. And I know how that sounds, believe me. I would have mocked someone for even suggesting it a year ago. But it got worse when she started moving differently, when my reflection started lifting her hand before I did, or mouthing words I hadn't said, or tilting her head like she was trying to get a better look at me through the glass. And one time, I swear to God, she winked, slow and deliberate, and I ran out of there so fast I left my phone behind and had to make Tanya go retrieve it. And when she came back and said nothing's in there but the mirror, I asked her, casually, if she'd ever seen anything weird, and she laughed. You mean like ghosts? And I forced a laugh too, even though I hadn't said anything about ghosts. And that night, I stayed late after hours and waited until I was the last one, then went in there alone with the door locked, lights on, my phone camera filming like I was about to confront some urban legend. And when I looked in the mirror, she was already there, nose almost touching the glass, same face, same uniform, but not the same eyes. And she mouthed something over and over like a chant, and I pressed closer to try and read her lips. Not yet, not yet, not yet. And then I blinked, and she was gone, and I checked the footage on my phone, and it was just me, staring like an idiot, looking scared and pathetic, and very much alone. And I should have stopped going in there. I tried to, but I couldn't help it, because the thing about seeing your own face beg for help is that it does something to your sense of self, like suddenly, you're not sure which version of you is the real one anymore. And every time I looked in any mirror, not just at work, I started second guessing whether it was actually me staring back, and I'd catch my reflection tilting slightly differently or blinking out of sync for a fraction of a second, and it drove me half insane until one night I went to HR, shaking, and told them I thought someone had been messing with the mirrors, maybe a two-way glass or some kind of projection prank, and they gave me a few days off, probably assuming I was having some kind of burnout episode, which maybe I was, except while I was gone, Alta Vita's head bartender vanished. Just straight up didn't show up for a shift and never came home. And when they checked the security footage, there were hours missing, files corrupted, and the last known image of her is from the hallway walking toward the bathroom. And suddenly people weren't laughing anymore. And the GM had a priest come in, low-key, no incense or Latin or anything, just a prayer muttered into the grout while we all pretended it was a plumbing inspection. But nothing changed, not really. And when I came back, people whispered and wouldn't go into the bathroom alone. But no one said her name out loud, and I wish I could tell you I left, that I got out before things escalated, but I didn't. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. And on the night of our Halloween event, when everyone was in costume and half the staff was drunk before midnight, I saw her again. But this time she wasn't in the mirror. She was behind me, standing just inside the door, and everyone else kept talking like she wasn't there, like I was the only one seeing her, and I ran out into the alley behind the bar and threw up behind the dumpster, and when I looked back through the window, she was sitting at the bar in my spot, sipping my shift drink and smiling with my mouth in a way I'd never smiled before. And the next morning when I woke up, something was wrong. My apartment felt too small. My skin felt too tight. My voice sounded different in the echo of the bathroom. And when I looked in the mirror, I was gone. Not literally, no. But the woman looking back at me wasn't scared anymore. She wasn't tired or haunted. She looked satisfied, rested whole. And I haven't gone back to work since. But I've been watching, and I think she has my job now. Because people still post photos from Alta Vita, and sometimes I'm in the background. Only it's not me. Not really, it's the woman from the mirror, wearing my face in uniform, living my life better than I ever could. And I don't know how long I've got before I forget completely who I was or how I used to feel. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up with a pressure behind my eyes, like something's watching me from inside, like she's still in there somewhere, whispering, not yet, not yet. And I wonder if one day I'll see a different version of myself in some other mirror, older, paler, more desperate. And when that happens, I think I'll finally understand what she was trying to warn me about. But by then it'll be too late, and someone else will be the one staring back, mouthing the words, waiting to take my place. Story 3. Last call. It was supposed to be a quick stop, 4 days in Bangkok before I hit Chiang Mai, then Laos, then Vietnam if the weather held. But like most bad decisions in my life, it started with a drink, just one, at a place called the Ember Lounge. One of those weird neon cave bars wedged between an ATM vestibule and a vape shop on a soy I couldn't pronounce, where the walls glowed deep red and the ceiling fans didn't work and everything smelled faintly of rain and antiseptic. And I remember thinking it had character. Like the kind of place you find a story in, and maybe that's what drew me in after the taxi dropped me off at the wrong hotel, and I needed to kill time before figuring out my next move. So I pushed through the humidity and went inside, dropped my backpack by the bar stool, and ordered a singa. The bartender was a guy in his 40s with a face that said he'd seen a lot more than he'd admit. And when I told him it was my birthday, he just nodded and poured me a double of something darker and smoother than anything I could afford. Said it was on the house, and I downed it fast because the place was empty and quiet and felt like a pocket of calm inside the chaos of the city. And then everything went sideways, or rather didn't, because after that drink I blinked, and it was morning, light bleeding through plastic blinds in a room I didn't recognize, a fan spinning overhead, my shoes neatly placed beside the bed like someone had undressed me with care, and my phone showed a dozen missed messages from friends back home asking where I was. But my replies made no sense, just weird emoji strings and typos I didn't remember sending. And when I tried to check the time, the phone screen froze, then died completely, and the charger port was bent like someone had forced in the wrong cable, and my wallet had no cash, just a single drink ticket from the Ember Lounge, and a receipt with the date circled, my birthday, and underneath, Eve. In careful handwriting, happy to have you back, which made no sense because I'd never been there before. At least I thought I hadn't. But when I made my way back to the bar to ask what happened, the bartender smiled like I was an old friend and said, "A rough night, huh? Oh, rough night, huh? You said you'd be back." And I laughed awkwardly and said I didn't remember much, and he said, "You always say that," and that should have been a red flag. But the truth is I was too disoriented to argue. And besides, the place had this weird pull, like the longer I sat there, the less I needed to remember anything else, like my mind was rearranging itself to match whatever version of events they were feeding me. And as I drank more, different people showed up and greeted me by name, people I didn't know, locals and foreigners alike, patting my shoulder, asking about things I didn't recall doing, mentioning events I couldn't verify. And I started wondering if maybe I had been there before. Maybe on some bender a few years ago, I blacked out and just forgot. But that didn't explain the dreams. Fragments of another life that kept surfacing at night. An apartment in Portland, a sister named Claire, a missing passport, a breakup I hadn't processed. Memories that didn't match the rhythm of my days now, because my days were starting to look exactly the same. Wake up in that same apartment, eat the same pad thai from the same food stall, return to the Ember Lounge, drink until close, repeat. And the weirdest part was how normal it started to feel, how the days melted into each other, and I stopped asking questions, like a fog had settled over my thoughts, and I couldn't remember why I ever wanted to leave until one night I asked a guy at the bar, British, probably mid-30s, said his name was Mason, how long he'd been there, and he just looked at me, paused, and said longer than I meant to. and laughed a little too hard before saying, "They let you think you're leaving, you know, right up until you don't." And I thought he was joking, but later that night, when I tried to book a bus ticket online, my debit card declined, and the bank app locked me out for suspicious activity and asked security questions I didn't recognize. When I called Claire, whose number I still remembered by heart, I got a robotic message saying the number wasn't in service, even though I'd just seen her post on Instagram. And that's when the walls started closing in, metaphorically at first, but soon literally. The city itself began rerouting me whenever I tried to leave. The subway signs changed while I was underground, pointing me back toward the bar. Taxis wouldn't take me out of the district. Even walking didn't work. I'd end up circling back to that same street with the same blinking neon. And eventually, exhausted and hungry, I'd go inside again, and the same bartender would smile and pour me a drink without asking, and I started to wonder if I was part of some elaborate scam, like maybe they'd drugged me and stolen my passport and identity. Maybe there was a dark web thing going on. I never saw any money being exchanged, no criminal edge, just this eerie sameness, like everyone was acting out a script and I was the only one trying to improvise. And then one night, I finally got up the nerve to go through the bar's back hallway, the one marked as staff only, and I found a room with filing cabinets full of customer logs, hundreds of names, faces, passport photos, timestamps, and my file was there too, with photos of me from different angles. Dated 5 years earlier. Even though I'd only arrived last week, and on the last page in red marker it said, "Is stage 3 acceptance," and my hands started shaking so bad I dropped the file, and that's when the bartender appeared behind me and said, "You weren't supposed to see that." And it happens sometimes, and I backed away and shouted at him, demanded answers, but he just looked sad and said, "This place gives people what they think they want," until they forget what that was, and I ran out the front, determined to leave for good, and I made it as far as the train station, where I collapsed on the platform, and when I woke up, I was back in my room. My shoes by the bed, a fresh drink ticket on the nightstand with a sticky note that read, "We all try to leave once, and now I don't know what day it is, or what year, and sometimes I forget my own name, but I remember the Ember Lounge. I remember the way the lights reflect off the bottles behind the bar like they're holding some secret. And I remember Mason's eyes the night before he vanished, wide, glassy, like he finally understood the truth and it broke something in him. And I don't know if I'm dead or dreaming or if the bar is some kind of purgatory that feeds on lost souls. But what scares me most isn't the being stuck. It's the comfort, the terrifying ease with which I've slipped into this routine, how sometimes I smile when I walk through that door, how the idea of going back to who I was feels less real than the ice in my glass, and maybe that's how it gets you, not with chains or locked doors, but with kindness. Repetition and a drink you can't quite stop drinking because you forget why you ever wanted to leave. And one day you wake up and there's a new backpacker at the bar, blinking under the neon, telling the bartender it's his birthday, and you smile and raise your glass to him and say, "The first one's on the house. You made it. But tell me, are you sure you're still you? Because the stories you just heard weren't just tales. They were confessions, fractured memories, the kind of truth that lives in the corners of your mind, waiting until the silence gets loud. The man who knew too much, the reflection that took her place, the bar that never let you leave, they don't exist on maps. But if you're not careful, you might find them anyway. And if you do, you won't even remember this warning. If these stories unsettled you, like they were tapping on the locked doors in your own mind, subscribe for more tales like this, based on true events too disturbing to forget. And before you sleep tonight, check your reflection. Make sure it's still yours.